Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
We do have a tradition of dealing with the questions of justice in society. Now, I don't think very often we have slanted that towards the women's problem. I mean, the churches did a good job, I think, of talking about labor unions for working people at the turn of the century. Our Catholic bishops were champions of the working people here in the United States. That indirectly benefited women and helped overcome child labor and so on. But I don't think we've addressed the question so directly. It seems to me what you had to do in this section is take the Church's general teaching on justice and then try to apply it to our specific situation of women today.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Sister Sarah Butler, theological consultant for the Pastoral Letter on Women's Concerns. Father Bacik and Sister Butler will be discussing the Pastoral Letter on Women's Concerns, Partners in Society. And now, here's Father Bacik.
Sarah, let's talk a little bit about the pastoral letter that the bishops are writing on women's concerns. They'd entitle it Partners in the Mystery of Redemption. I know you functioned as the theological consultant for this whole project and know a great deal about it. So I would like to direct your attention to this document and see if we can't discuss parts of it. I consider you to be one of the reigning experts in the United States on this question, and so I hope to learn a lot. I should probably be quiet and not talk so much on this program and let you say more about it. But let's just talk a little bit about some of the background work that you did on this pastoral. Did this take up a good deal of your time and energy? I know you've worked on it for a number of years.
Well, as you perhaps know, we started out by listening to women, and the whole model is a model of listening first and then entering into a dialogue. So the listening sessions were very, very instructive, very interesting. We had representatives of about 24 national groups, and then we had reports from over 100 dioceses and also campus ministry and military installations. So we heard from about 75,000 women. The reports from the leaders of the national organizations were perhaps the most interesting because we had a chance to dialogue directly with the women who came to report, and we found a tremendous variety of points of view, everything from very conservative to very liberal points of view. We listened to them all, I think, with respect and with real interest in what their input was, and then we tried to work that up. It took the first couple of years really just listening and sorting out what was being said, and then we all were involved in writing background papers of various sorts in attempt to address these questions, bringing to bear what was the contemporary Catholic teaching, what were the areas of difficulty, and so on. Each of us out of our own specialization, I'm speaking now of the women consultants, prepared different types of background papers.
How many consultants were there?
Well, there were 5 of us. One, Mary Beth Kirchner, is a psychologist at Boston College, and she specialized in the psychology of sex differences. She is engaged in counseling women and is very current on the questions that are of great concern to women as they approach counseling, family violence, and so on. And Rhonda Chervin is a philosopher, teaches out on the West Coast, and she addressed the philosophical problems. Fame Perkins, also at Boston College, is a well-known New Testament scholar, and she was able to give us input on the New Testament text and the tradition as it's experienced is coming through the biblical perspective. Toinette Eugene is a provost of a ecumenical divinity school, Colgate Rochester Divinity School, and she is specialized in social questions and religious implications. And so the 5 of us were consultants. In addition,
and then Susan Muto.
Susan Muto has been engaged as the writer, and she is a director of the Institute of Christian Spirituality at Duquesne University. And Sister Mariella Fry, who's a staff person for the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, has been with this project right from its beginning. So there were a group of us involved in the process, and we have been equal members on the committee and able to contribute as much as we are willing to contribute.
And also with a wide variety of backgrounds,
yes,
each coming from different disciplines, and of course your role was to be the theological consultant on the document.
Yes.
I think that the document you've produced is certainly wide-ranging and reflects the opinions of women around the country. I mean, that surely is one of its strengths, and I think all the commentators can see that. that it has been dialogic, and there's been a long effort to listen both to the positive things that women have to say and the negative things. I suppose some people would be surprised to find in the document some of the negative statements that in a bishop's document, which I think the methodology you've chosen and the format of the letter really facilitates that. In other words, it enables the bishops to say, well, some of these women are opposed to the Church's position on birth control.
Yes.
Some Catholic women are, and we must listen to them and bring what they have to say in dialogue with the official Church teaching. Now, that strikes me, as a step forward in this whole process. At least we're becoming more aware and officially recognizing those, as you call them, voices of alienation on very important questions.
Well, I think that is the originality of this document, that it really attempts to report, and we even have direct quotes where they were available, to kind of crystallize some of the ideas. We are reporting what women said in the listening session, and in doing that reporting, we're taking into account a whole range of different attitudes and expressions. And whether this is actually going to float as a pastoral letter in this form, I'm not aware yet. It certainly is original, and we hope that it will indicate to the women who've been speaking to us that we are listening and attempting to hear that. I think the whole process is in effect an attempt to have an orderly dialogue within the Church about issues that are very controversial and very highly charged, very emotion-laden, and very important for our culture and our times. The changing roles of women and men really are affecting us all in ways we have hard to come to grips with.
You talked about an orderly way, and I think you have divided your material up well. At least it's quite credible and intelligible in my mind. You have 4 main chapters in this document, which is entitled Partners in the Mystery of Redemption. And in the first chapter, you talk about women in their own personhood, starting out with the dignity of the human being. We hear a lot of cries from women about the alienation in the culture, the sexism that they have to deal with, their work being devalued, and so on, and that part of the Church's response to that is to uphold the dignity of all people, to talk about the equality of women. We have a lot of contemporary voices in the Church that have made that point. Pope Paul VI being one of the main spokespersons for all of that. The Second Vatican Council has some good things to say about women being treated with equality and respect. So that seems to be a good beginning point. And then the document in its second chapter goes into talking about women in relationship. There's a lot of talk there about marriage, the problems of married life, men often not meeting their responsibilities in raising the family and so on. There's important statements that made about the value of work in the home, and that women do not have to find their fulfillment only by having careers and paid jobs outside the home, that the Church wants to uphold the dignity of family life and what goes on there, especially the nurturing function of women. And so that second chapter seems to have important things to say about marriage and family life, fidelity, commitment, the call of Christ to live out the covenant of marriage. And then that sort of sets the stage for the third chapter that I want to focus on now, and they call that one Partners in Society. And here we're talking more about women's role in society and some of the injustice that we find there, and how the Church's message of justice might respond to that. You want to say anything about the overall planning of the document that way?
I think that when we were listening to women, they were so taken with the idea of being invited to speak to the bishops that they focused on justice within the Church, and we did not really address the questions of justice in society as fully as we might have. Although I think that there is a sense that women want the Church, which they see the bishops as the teaching arm of the Church, they want the Church to support them more vigorously and more effectively, more publicly in their struggle to achieve justice in the marketplace and in the social realm. Many women are kind of embarrassed. They feel that the Church appears to be anti-women. The failure of the Catholic bishops to support the ERA, for example, some years ago, was a disappointment to a number of women who looked at that as kind of the solution, as the remedy to injustice in the life of society. But in any case, we are looking for a stronger voice from the bishops in regard to child support, divorce settlements, Social Security benefits, maternity leaves, equal pay, just across the board, stronger support for women in the larger world of work. One of the things that's new to our generation is that women are living so much longer that even if they do choose a vocation of motherhood and they raise a family, they still might have another 20, 30, even 40 years of active life in which they can contribute to society. So that in addition to women who are working because they must work or because they choose to work for reasons of the personal reasons that they've worked out and can accommodate that within at the same time raising a family, there are also women who are going to be working because they have fulfilled one vocation and still have time left, years left, in which to join the wider challenge of civilizing our own world, our own community. And so they need more support for this. They need the bishops to speak a word about the what is due them in equity as they enter into the larger life of society. It's kind of a new question.
Mm-hmm. In your chapter, 3, Partners in Society, you have some voices of affirmation, some good things that women have to say. I noticed that they're supportive of the pastoral letter that the bishops did in 1986 called Economic Justice for All,
yes.
that they see some good things said in there about women's contribution to the economic life of the country and so on, and that wanting to overcome some of the problems that end up hurting women in many ways. I noticed that also they're happy about the Church's support of education for women. We think of the Catholic colleges, the women's colleges that I think have done a fine job, and there's really has been opportunity very often for women to move forward, especially by getting their education and then being able to make their contribution in society.
That was really the object of a great deal of comment. I was surprised and kind of heartened to hear that, how many women valued their Catholic education, seeing it as giving them a good start, a good foundation, that the Church's outreach to women, especially through the members of women's religious congregations, for taking on the education of girls and women and preparing them for life in society was something highly valued, something women reach back to and look back to with love and devotion and real affection for those persons who gave them this kind of a good start. That was very, very strong.
I notice, too, and they're happy that the Church has voiced opposition to the exploitation of women. They see now and then good things being said along that line. I notice Pope John Paul II is being quoted here as saying good things, that women should not be an object of trade at the service of selfish interest and mere pleasure. So there's a good sense that at least sometimes the Church speaks out in favor of women and against exploitation.
Yes, I think particularly sexual exploitation through pornography and prostitution and so on, and oppression, that there's been a great deal of comment about that and strong church teaching. Women today, though, are looking for the American Catholic bishops to speak about this new phenomenon, the feminization of poverty, in which women bear an unfair portion of the burden of our society, that the largest number of the poor are women, and women with the care of dependent children or dependent other dependents. Women are presumed somehow to be responsible for the elderly and the aged and their families, or the handicapped or the ill, as well as the children. The women today are getting caught in the crunch, and they experience this business of being the women in the middle, and women who are caring for their own children as well as for their elderly parents and other relatives. And women would like to know that the bishops are aware of this, that the Church is speaking to this, that there is support and some kind of acknowledgement of the many faceted roles that women are assuming, and also a challenge to men to assume part of this burden, not to simply believe that this is women's work, the care of persons and their relationships, but to discover that men too could benefit by being challenged to assume personal responsibility, for example, for aged parents or for the children. And that is a challenge, calling us, I think, to a conversion.
I think they have some interesting statistics along that line quoted in the document. They talk about 1/3 of female-headed families live in poverty, below the poverty level, according to government statistics. 1/3 of female-headed families. That's amazing. And then it says women who work full-time, year-round, earned, according to 1984 statistics, 64 cents for every dollar paid to men.
Well, this is
a great disparity here.
This is terrible. And when you're faced with actual women, how many... they say it's typical of women to tell stories, and many women wanted to report to us specific instances of women suffering because of their poverty, and particularly because of male irresponsibility. We find then many stories reported to us of women who are caring for 3 or 4 small children, at the same time trying to work in order to get off welfare because they don't think that has any dignity to be on welfare. They're not getting child support. Perhaps they felt obliged to separate from the husband in this case because of alcoholism or drug addiction or some other serious problem that was actually destroying their family. So they're left on their own, and then they are carrying the full burden of providing for the children, trying to keep the home together, educate the children, and bring in a wage, and they cannot get work that is paying them adequately for this. And when they find that they're not being paid adequately by the church, let's say a single mother working for the church, working for a convent, for example, or a hospital, a Catholic hospital, and they're not getting paid well, then they really just tremendously distressed by that and upset and want to call the church to acknowledge and remedy that.
I notice that they talk here about elderly women, too. It says elderly women constitute the fastest growing segment of the population. And due to their relatively greater longevity, more elderly women than men are found in nursing homes or require medical care. And then a striking stat, the rate of poverty among elderly women is 60% higher than that of elderly men.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really calls attention to a fast-growing phenomenon in our country. I mean, we have so many widows, women are living longer, the Social Security benefits often don't make it for them, and many of them who have contributed so much and lived unselfishly and given to their families and taken care of others now find themselves in this very difficult position.
Right, and I think that's the effort of the pastoral letter here, is to bring that to light, to raise it up and to call attention to it in order to provide better pastoral care and to provide other types of social support through legislation. For example, the bishop's lobbying efforts to promote legislation that will advance the position of these women and provide for them and their need.
So that's all under the heading of the feminization of poverty, an attempt to look at the poverty profile from the perspective of women, and I would say it really is quite a distressing picture when we begin to look at it that way. I notice they have a section here on sexism and racism as well. They talk about Black and Hispanic women, Asian and Native American women bearing a double burden of sexism and racism.
I think of the hearings that we had, the ones that were most touching and that really moved us all to tears, I would say, were the response we had from representatives of Black women and Hispanic women. And it's because they are the stereotypes that affect women in general doubly affect women who belong to a minority population in our country, that they are viewed as members of a class, women, and then of a particular class, Hispanic women, Black women, and the effort for a woman in that position to establish herself, to define herself as a person with her own dignity, is very, very difficult. They have to work against attitudinal prejudices that are very deep and probably prejudices we aren't even aware of. And they find that within the church they're looking for a home. Women in these communities are basically the ones who have preserved the faith in their community. They are the ones who have taught CCD. They are the ones who have taken care of the church. They're the ones who have valued the family and tried to keep it all together against many other forces. And when they find that they cannot get a role, they cannot be given equal participation in the life of the church, they're very distressed about that. They find that more burdensome than the average woman coming out of a white middle-class background who has many opportunities for education and other types of advancement. They find that more difficult because they say, we're the ones who are keeping the church alive in these communities. Why can't we have our own ministry validated in some way, raised up? Why can't we be provided the opportunity to develop policies that will help us and our families and our people?
I notice your document tries to respond to that. You have a section called Reflecting on Our Heritage, in which you try to draw something out of the church teaching that will enable us to deal with these problems. You have a section called Justice in Relation to the Work of Women. We have had a long history of Catholic social thought. A lot of us date it back to 1891 with Pope Leo XIII and Rerum Novarum and the great social encyclicals that have been issued ever since by our popes, often on the anniversary of Rerum Novarum. And we've had important statements by our current pope along this line, the encyclical he wrote on work. And so we do have a tradition of dealing with the questions of justice in society. Now, I don't think very often we have slanted that towards the women's problem. I mean, the churches did a good job, I think, of talking about labor unions for working people at the turn of the century. Our Catholic bishops were champions of the working people here in the United States. That indirectly benefited women and helped overcome child labor and so on. But I don't think we've addressed the question so directly. It seems to me what you had to do in this section is take the Church's general teaching on justice and then try to apply it to our specific situation of women today.
Actually, we do have some contemporary Catholic teaching on this, both the Apostolic Letter on Work and the Apostolic Letter on the Family and Society, Christian Family and Society, address the question of work and of women's work. And this is a message we've hardly digested, and I think we have a lot to do in terms of even our political action on this. On the one hand, the Church is teaching that women should be free to choose to work or not work outside the home. That should be a choice. It's not just that you do it because you have to bring in the income. You might choose to work because you have special gifts and contributions that you can make outside the home, and you're able to adjust it within your marriage and family situation so as to accommodate all the various demands on your time. That is a choice that women have, and many women find that at church, in their ordinary parishes, women who work outside the home are kind of looked down upon, as if that weren't a choice, that was really their own choice to make. So that's an important point. On the other hand, the Church teaches that work within the home, the keeping of the home and the raising of children, needs to be reevaluated socially and given its appropriate recognition and due, and even to the fact that the Vatican, the Pope, is teaching that the society ought to be so arranged that women could choose to stay at home and take care of their family, and that there would be a living wage given to a single wage earner. I think in terms of contemporary picture in the United States, we have a lot to do to think about that. It seems that the pressure is to remedy that situation by having both parents work and the children put in daycare center, and to provide that as a right, that you have a right to daycare. But there's another point of view, that the right to daycare ought to be balanced out by the option, at least, of getting a tax cut or some other sort of legal provision that'll allow a woman who chooses to do that to stay home and simply attend to the vocation of motherhood and raising the children, if that is her choice. I think
so the bishops are trying to keep two things in front of us here, aren't they? They don't want women to be pressured to go outside the home and to work. There ought to be other ways to do that so they can raise their children and so on, so they don't feel they have to do that. There's not psychological or social or financial pressure to do that. On the other hand, that when women do have that opportunity, if they so choose, and when they go into the workforce, that they would get paid equal wages and have opportunity to get the better paying jobs and achieve the higher status, so that we would get rid of discrimination in society. So it seems like both those ideas are part of your document here.
Of course, the thing is that poor women have always had to work outside the home and also take care of their children and raise them. So this is, in some sense, an issue just of your middle class and upper class women to have the leisure to discuss this. The remedy, however, that is suggested by the Church, namely that the society itself would provide so that a family might be able to structure itself so that a woman could stay home with her children, that would benefit both poor women and other women who would make that choice. But when we find, let's say, feminists in our own culture struggling to have the right to work outside the home and to develop a career, they often forget that for poor women it would be a tremendous liberation to be able to stay at home and to take care of their own children and not have to put them in daycare, to raise them and to create a family of their own. That would be the liberation, not the liberation to go out into the working world.
It's an interesting twist on it, isn't it? Yes. I noticed that the bishops, when they talk about the Christian social ethic and so on, say that the emphasis is on an ethic of cooperation rather than one of competition.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of feminine voices that I think say that women specifically could help us fill out that picture and help us get a better feel for what it means to live in a cooperative way rather than a competitive one. I'm not sure that's always fair to men in the way it's brought out, but I think there maybe is a distinctive contribution here that women can make to our overall social sense of things, emphasizing cooperative modes rather than competitive ones. I noticed that they center this on Christ again, as every social ethic has to do, that Christ did come to liberate the captives and to preach the good news to the poor, that he heard the cries of the poor, and that he himself broke down a lot of the taboos in his own culture. He reached out to women, he talked to them in public, he made them part of the religious discourse. There was a great barrier breaking that Jesus did in his own society, that he moved beyond the patriarchy that was dominant at his time and seemed to treat women with a sensitivity and a care, and to try to bring them into the mainstream in a way that far exceeded the general patterns in his culture.
Right, and that would be the call to the Church today, that we would all undergo the conversion to behave in that same way to women.
Yeah, certainly that's what we really need to do. I notice in each of these chapters, Sarah, that you have put in a section in which they call responding as bishops. I think the bishops then are trying to say, well, here's what we'll do about all of this, how we're going to try to make improvements. There's one line I notice here. It says, all of this means we must undertake an examination of the modes of acting, of the possessions and lifestyle found within the church itself. There's that general perception that the institution that's going to talk about justice has to be acting in a just way.
Well, this was very seriously addressed, and the question of just wages within the church, appropriate salaries for laypersons who are being employed more and more by the church today, as we are seeing new modes of operation and the inclusion of lay men and women in the church, that we need appropriate salaries and benefits. And this extends also to religious men and women working in the church, that where before religious orders were perhaps able to afford to have women and men, sisters and brothers, working with hardly any stipend at all coming in, today it is no longer possible. There's the economic reality is that religious need to have better stipends and better benefits in order just to survive. And so we're looking to that. And I feel there is a very strong and good format for collaboration on remedying that kind of problem already today in place in the Roman Catholic Church in the United States.
Good, Sarah. We've been talking about the third chapter of this pastoral letter written by the bishops on women's concerns, and it has to do with society, and certainly it is a grim picture, the feminization of poverty, and so many more women living under poverty than men in our society, extends to elderly women as well. And within our tradition of social justice, we ought to have resources to draw on, and that leads us then to policy positions like trying to help women secure maternity leaves and having adequate time for physical recovery after giving birth and so on. And I think that will eventually begin to make a difference in our society.
You've been listening to Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik talked with Sister Sarah Butler, the theological consultant for the Pastoral Letter on Women's Concerns. The topic of this week's Reflections was the Pastoral Letter on Women's Concerns, Partners in Society. If you have any comments on today's show or suggestions for future programs, please write Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Ministry, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Commission of the Diocese of Toledo.